Hello, everyone. I'm ecstatic to say that this is the 19th and final episode of this season. My reason for starting this was pretty personal in the sense that I just really needed to make a committed effort to have conversations with people I respect, to keep instilling that elusive hope in myself. I started to realize just how deeply I needed this, and if I'm being honest, still it is embarrassing somehow. I don't know why the idea seems so simple, but when I'm in that place, I ask myself things like, why do you need to do it as a podcast? And can't you just get coffee with a friend? And I guess what I realize in those moments is that my need for these conversations goes so deep, deep enough that I feel like other people might feel the same way. And, even phrasing like that seems shallow to me. I don't really know how to explain it any other way. What I do know is that I'm going to keep going. It's been an honor and joy getting to spend time chatting with people I've known for years, people I've known for a couple of hours, and unexpectedly, the growing community over at Patreon now. So thanks for all the support. This podcast will always be available for free, but if you'd like it to continue, please consider sharing it with a friend or joining the Patreon. And now, with all of that being said, I couldn't be more excited to share the final episode with you. Our guest today is my dear friend Kelly Beline, who's an organizer with Socialist Alternative and recently co-authored the book Socialist Feminism and the New Women's Movement. Kelly is the person in my life that very simply taught me how important it was to love women and in turn myself. She showed me this just by being herself through new ideas and conversations that I had never had with anybody else. I had to do a lot of learning after becoming conscious and figure out things for myself, but she was definitely the person that helped me achieve my own moment of lift. The realization that equality didn't exist for women and that it was a problem. The realization that even though I was able to accept the idea of inequality in a lot of other instances, for some reason, or many, rather, I'm sure, sexism and feminism were out of my reach. I could go on, but I'll just say, thank you, Kelly Beline, instead. Let's go. Hi, Kelly Beline.
Oh,
How's it going?
Good.
Yay. We're on the internet now.
Oh my God. I thought about this ahead of time. I was like, I don't know what to expect. And I imagined us sitting with mics, giggling uncontrollably until like Gage busts in and be like, hey, shut up.
Very appropriate. And it could
So
still
I guess,
happen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Give it time.
He just, so I close this vent a little bit because that goes right up to the living room. So we could open it back up again. Yeah.
Maybe later.
Cool.
Good.
Back in town.
Back in town.
Kelly Beline is, I kept trying to, usually I'm like pretty easily able to come up with like a few buzzwords for who you are. But I kind of had a hard time. Activist, Person?
Organizer.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
organizer.
Cool.
It's a good one. Yeah.
Author?
Mm.
Whoa! You can't say no! I'm holding a book up that she wrote.
I was a part of writing it.
Well, yeah.
Collaborative effort. But yes,
Author.
Yeah. It's a lot of work.
Very good. Organizer, author, badass. One of my best friends. Yeah, another fun thing I like to do is, I mean, like, even if I guess haven't met people yet, I kind of like to be like, how did we get to know each other? Sometimes it's a really fun story. Like, I emailed you. But this one's a little bit more fun. We met in 8th grade volleyball.
8th grade volleyball.
Woo!
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a very vivid memory that probably only exists because of the picture, but like of us like side by side.
Yes.
I have an Old Navy shirt on, I'm pretty sure.
And on the ramp in the middle school.
Yep.
Walking down the ramp.
Very good. Very cute.
It was a good time.
It was. But yeah, we both grew up in the country together. It's a little full circle because I try and the very first episode I was like, hi, I'm a bumpkin. So it's kind of fun getting to talk about that more.
Yeah.
Kind of bleak as far as like equality and I don't know, stuff other than like corn and meth go.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of charming to go back.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
but in
I love it.
Doses.
But yeah, for sure. Like if I could have more of my friends there, I would definitely think about moving back and living in rural area.
Yeah.
As Kelly shakes her head.
Yeah. I mean, there's something that, it's charming, it's quiet, but then you have to go into like the grocery store, which takes 25 minutes to drive to. And it's like, well,
very true.
It gets more bleak the more you go into town.
When do you remember like the first time when you were like, I gotta get the fuck out of here? Or did that happen?
Oh, it definitely happened. I'm trying to remember. I mean, I think I figured out in high school I didn't quite fit in, and that's also when I started having more political ideas, and that certainly didn't fit in. And so that's sort of, I think, where it started. Yeah, high school. But getting out, I mean, I was so born and raised in a small town. To me, getting out, Minneapolis was the biggest place that existed to me. Like, that's the idea of other cities didn't make sense. It was just Minneapolis is the city. That's where I would go.
And it was like a feat to like do that.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that feeling? Like I had that feeling where it was like, yeah, like it'd be cool to get out and like, but it's a high possibility that I won't just because of like,
right.
Where, I mean,
yeah,
because people don't leave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, everything rested on getting into the University of Minnesota.
Absolutely.
Which I didn't think was a possibility. Like, there was a whole period where I thought getting out was like, maybe I could get into St. Cloud State and be in St. Cloud. Is that better? I don't know. Never been there. But then I did pretty good on the ACTs and was like, oh, I could go. The college counselor had to tell me. I was like, hey, do you think I could get into St. Cloud State? Like, I don't know what these test scores mean. And she's like, yeah, you can. Where else do you want to go? And then, whoa, Minneapolis was a possibility. Holy shit.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So what were the first like political thoughts that you had that were a little abnormal comparatively?
Comparatively, the Iraq War was the thing, right? Like, we were in, 9th grade or 10th grade when I started. I don't know when it started, but that's when I started having like more concrete thoughts about it. And the idea of war was probably the main first radicalizing thing. And then also, I was thinking about this after we talked that like I had thoughts that were more developed, that were like anti-racist and anti-homophobic way before ever thinking anything that was anti-sexist or like acknowledging that was a thing. But that was also sort of like in the mix in terms of high school first political thoughts was like, war is bad.
Totally.
Hey, racism is bad.
Totally.
Stuff like that. Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that also I think that I was probably much less conscious than you comparatively on our timelines, just because of at least my viewpoint of like how I grew up and was very like religious, like
Mm-hmm.
men are the head of the
Right.
household and like whatever they say, like
Oh, yeah.
yeah, and just but it's weird because at the same time it was like I remember like never believing in Santa Claus, never really believing in Jesus, and
Mm-hmm.
like, like, okay, yeah, cool, like all the adults are saying this is tight and they feel something. I feel nothing. I
Right.
know that for a fact. So, like, I guess I'll just go along with it until I don't.
Yeah. It's also cultural. Like, it's a part of your whole
Right.
cultural existence.
Totally.
Yeah.
But, like, the idea that, like, I guess I'm just trying to attach it to, I feel like I feel like also like homophobic shit or like racist shit was obviously bad to me. Like I just
Right.
knew for a fact, like not good.
Mm-hmm.
But I still, probably the thing that I believed the most without even believing it fully was that men should be in charge of women.
Mm-hmm.
And I like truly don't think it was until we were living together years later down in Minneapolis when like I knew you were going. What was your exact major? Women's
History.
Oh, history. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. And but what was that paper on?
I studied like the
Women in
role of
prison?
women in labor after like during World War II.
Okay,
But I also took other like gender classes. That
okay.
might have been what you saw. Yeah.
Our conversations, in the very least, were like, oh, like, it is a quantitative fact that women are not equal. Like,
Right.
I mean, that didn't even register, even with being trained that, like, that's the way it's supposed to be, that inequality, like, somehow I was still brainwashed to be like, oh, it equals out somewhere.
Right.
Like,
You have
you know,
different roles.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Like, we get the pleasure of supporting men, like,
Yes. What a pleasure.
yeah. Terrifying. So yeah, that was a huge thing for me, and I try to say it as often as I can. Thank you for that. That was a very just like beautiful formative experience in my life, I think. Just that whole time period of like coming into consciousness and literally for the first time I think like realizing who I was because of it. Like, oh, I'm a woman and I need
Right.
to stand up for myself and I need to stand up for other women and
Yeah.
like, yeah, holy shit.
Absolutely. I think it can be, depending on your identity, super attached to, who you are when you figure out or when you become politically conscious.
Totally.
And it can be super transformative.
Totally. Yeah. So you moved out of the country. You went to school. You started having political thoughts in high school. When did you start taking like political action or getting more organized, or when did you even like realize that was something that you wanted or needed to do?
So it was soon after I moved to Minneapolis that I met, and I had like sort of vague political thoughts, from that, like racism is a problem in the world, not just like exactly what you're talking about, just something that exists. And then what really changed is I met socialists in Minneapolis, right? So I like went to the University of Minnesota. I was such a baby. It was like out of the country, fresh in the world, and had like basic thoughts, but nothing really pulled together. And then I met a socialist organization and got involved, and that was, for me, it was like more of an education than my college degree was. It was just
Totally.
like it broke everything open, where that's, for me, that was sort of similar to what you're talking about, where it's just like it breaks open this idea that like the world is just how it is. Like the process of learning, first of all, why it became that way, like why is the world the way it is, which is something that we don't, is not like a basic part of education in school or anywhere else. And then also that it doesn't have to be like this, right? And that there's things that we can do to fight back. And so meeting socialists was just, and becoming a socialist was, for me, a huge, like that's what, and then once that started happening, then it's just, what do we, like, you have to do something.
Right,
There's no real option to just.
Switch is flipped.
Yeah, exactly. There it is. So.
Totally. Yeah. That I want to rechime your statement about just fucking Realizing that, yeah, you have something to do with how the world is
Right.
like very
Mm-hmm.
basic and freeing idea. It's fucking crazy. So, did you just like immediately find a home in the socialist organization that you jumped into?
Um, well, I feel like it happened a few times, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I found it. It was really exciting. Broke everything open. Met great people, really smart people. Started reading things and talking
Mm-hmm.
about things that I just never thought of, and that sort of explained that were answers to questions that I never knew I had.
Mm-hmm.
Like why are women treated this way?
Mm-hmm.
Do like why do we all and so many people and have to work so hard and work themselves to death and
Mm-hmm.
can't afford health care? Wow, there's a certain very small layer of society that's just like loaded and
Mm-hmm.
totally fine and basically through that money control things. And that was sort of like a breaking open where like there I was. That was really exciting. But then there's more, that's once you know that, when you know that or acknowledge that you believe that, that's one step. But I think it was a difficult road from there on where it's like, okay, well then what do I do? And once you see and sort of start acknowledging all of the problems that exist, yes, a switch is flipped and there's no going back, but also it can be really demoralizing too. Like it can just be sort of like, okay, well we need to do something. But if this is a whole system, if the whole world is, if the capital system that the world exists under is fully rotten and like under that system, no, women aren't going to defeat sexism and
Mm-hmm.
no, we aren't going to defeat racism and all these things just through that system, then that can be really demoralizing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was difficult. And also for me, I went through a simultaneous process of, more fully recognizing how much sexism had impacted my life, but everything around me and how
Mm-hmm.
ingrained it is. And I definitely went through a period of wondering, like, is it socialism I'm looking for, or is it feminism?
Sure.
Like either or, which at the time it felt like an either or,
Totally.
And maybe it's just that I'm a feminist.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, capitalism's bad, but like sexism is crushing us.
Totally.
And that was a painful, but really I think that was the experience that like transformed me the most, of like discovering how ingrained they are. Like I went through a period where I was like, nope. Went through like my own traumatic things that relate to sexism, and it's like, oh, actually I'm a feminist. But every sort of like journey I went on with that of trying to find answers, I mean, it is so connected, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
why would you say that like we can fight for a world where there's no sexism, but leave the idea of homophobia, transphobia, racism untouched, right? Like that doesn't make sense either. And so for me, it was most empowering when I sort of went through a process of finding how all of that mashes together, and that being a socialist means being a feminist if you're a good socialist, and so on, and fighting for all of these things, and the fact that we're not going to defeat just one oppression, like that just won't happen. We shouldn't want that to happen, but you have to defeat them all, and that's exactly the point, is like we all have to fight together and fight the oppression that we face as working people, as the people who are not the 1% in society. So
Totally.
that was sort of when it really solidified for me.
Was that at the same time kind of a realization, and obviously correct me if I'm wrong, but that, there's so many things that we all have to fight against together, and one of the biggest like pins of that to take down a lot of the systemic shit is capitalism, and just like fighting against that idea even, or like spreading the idea that capitalism only perpetuates these things.
I think so. And just how much it gets pulled together, right? Like we see right now with what is happening, where working people are fighting back. Who's at the forefront of fighting back? Who's at the forefront of all these strikes that have been happening over the last year? It's predominantly women workforces. It's nurses, it's teachers, and that I think that pulls it together too, to show that like we have a common power. Like we actually make society run, and not in a super old mechanical way of like we're in the factories, but like all of society runs because of us. And us uniting together against capitalism is sort of like that's what can actually take down sexism. That's what, and we can do that in a united way. Yeah.
So when did you kind of move on from just involving yourself in socialist groups or actions or movements or whatever, into kind of placing yourself in them? And I feel like, there was a point from my perspective at least, where you're like, oh no, this is my life. Like now I'm like committing myself to this, and it's not just a thing I do after my job,
Right.
whatever. It is my job.
Right. Uh-huh. I became super lucky where I can now like do this full time. Like, this is my job, which is a huge privilege. Like not many people get to do it. There's not a lot of money in socialist organizing, and so the few people that are privileged to be like paid staff in a way, it is really lucky. And in a way, I mean, I was given the opportunity around like random election campaigns that we were doing to try to get socialists in office. But then I had the option of sort of, we always need to be investing in like developing newer people and younger people. And so I was given that opportunity like 5 or 6 years ago. But for me to like want to do that and for that to be like the commitment of my life, it was, I don't know. I can't even pinpoint. I know there was specific situations, but it was just the more I got involved, the more I learned, and the more I worked through, like, it does make a difference. And seeing, I mean, I think a big part of it too is obviously destroying capitalism and making a more equal society is the goal, right? But there are so many things that happen, like, it was also around that time that there was a more increase in surge in open like fights against sexism and the sort of like rape culture fight back at the time. And there's just various struggles that break out. And I think, also Occupy Wall Street and stuff like that, where you see that like consciousness is changing in society right now. And that's happening. And that is sort of like, that gives people confidence when we see things that can win. So I was involved in a struggle in South Minneapolis where we were fighting home foreclosures, where we were literally blocking foreclosures, and in some situations we're able to like stop a family from being evicted over time through like the community coming together and like systematically blocking, like somebody is there at all times, and there's like a call out that can be done in organizing and sort of pulling together rallies and stuff to show that like the community is with these families, and the banks, this sort of predatory lending does not work here.
And the police force is being used as a private security system.
Exactly. For the banks.
Yeah.
And so stuff like that, where you see people come together and see things that you can win. I mean, it's not destroying capitalism, but it raises confidence. Like everybody in that community who was involved in that struggle, or those many struggles that we had, you feel more confident afterwards that like you can fight back. And I think I went through my own process of that, of like various struggles and various things. And at the same time as like learning, I was also involved and could see that like we can make a difference. And you can see through that, like how in the like we can build struggle in a serious way. And even if it's just the building blocks, you need that. So I think that's sort of the process I went through to get really convinced.
Awesome. And when do you think, this is like one of my favorite things to bring up. I'm just like thinking, I was like, oh my God, Kelly, yeah, I feel like I just talk about the same shit about you all the time to all my friends. Sorry, Mom.
I was gonna say, I don't know what's that.
The dismantling capitalism, dismantling rape culture. When did that happen? I was trying to place it on a timeline.
It was around the slut walks.
Okay.
When they were taking off.
Yep. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the slut walks were taking off, which is just really showing that like people were ready, to, it's not just like in society, we say, okay, rape is bad. Like that's just a truism that people know, but like having the motivation to fight it and to fight a culture that says it's okay to rape, or to fight a system that's so sexist that women are blamed for being sexually assaulted. People were fighting back. And I think that was, part of this whole process that's taking place, where we see now where women's struggles are breaking out all over the world. But we wanted to do a sort of like a meeting to pull together people from the rallies that took place to sort of just, talk and like put forward socialist ideas, and connecting it to capitalism. And so, we did this public meeting coming out of the slut walks that was dismantling rape culture, dismantling capitalism, had a series of speakers. And it was really successful. And we saw, which we see a lot, where there's people who come to rallies who are fucking amped, right? And they see this as like hope. But they want to do more. Like you want to do more than just go to a rally, even though rallies are really important. And so we got a lot of those folks who came to the rally, were super pumped, want to do something more. We got to talk to them and get them involved. But the meeting was really successful. So we did a few more times. Like we did like a sort of series in South Minneapolis and at MCTC and the University of Minnesota, to pull forward, like, sort of pull together our collective experiences too. Like, this is at a time when the slut walks were happening and happening around the world, and pull together that experience, because I think that is really important. Those moments when around the world there's protests on a common issue, like we saw that with the women's marches against Trump, where it's around the world acknowledging there's a problem, and it shows the society is moving, that people want change. So we want to like discuss it, you know, and get the most we can out of it.
I remember like sitting in I think I went to one of the U of M meetings, and it's a wild thing that in my mind I can only maybe compare to like kids that weren't around when the internet existed, but just like being kind of in that limbo of like, you know, I don't remember when the actual like originator of the Me Too movement did that, but it was definitely before it was common talk.
Oh,
And
yeah.
like, yeah, just literally the like having space to let people affected by rape culture name it and not be put down was like felt so wild. Yeah.
And putting forward that this isn't just that, there's so much more to it.
Yeah.
That it is connected to an entire system that that holds everybody down. I think that also shows that like everybody has a stake in fighting it too. And just like we know that, you know, sexism, you know, it holds back people of all genders, and that is a real thing. Similarly, like we all have an interest to fight it then, right? And I think that's a similar thing when we see that, like, you know, sexual assault is a part of a system of oppression, and that capitalism is invested in all of these systems of oppression, maintaining sort of like a divide. Like if we see that, like, if you see somebody else's right, other people gaining rights as a threat to your rights, then why would you unite with them, right? And it really does like keep everybody, the idea, you know, it keeps everybody separated. Why, you know, the idea that people who are afraid of immigrants stealing their jobs, right? It's not immigrants that are keeping your wages down. It's the corporations that use the threat of immigrants to keep you accepting lower wages, because if you don't, you know, if you want to raise, well, we have people we can hire for less who are afraid because of their immigration status. That really isn't, you know, it is the corporations and the establishment who are benefiting from that, not the people who are immigrating to the United States. And I think that's really similarly applied to all of these other oppressions. That there's, it benefits, you know, sexism is not really benefited from men. They are not the ones maintaining the system, in as much that they're also impacted by it. And there is a capitalism benefits, the establishment benefits, corporations benefit. They can pay women less because it's you know, it's reinforced in society. And so all of us fighting that is what changes it. And it's the only way to change it. And so, I think it's really important to pair those things of like bringing experiences and like lived experiences forward, but also pairing it with the idea that like this is a system and we have to fight it.
And again and again and again, it affects everyone, not just women. Like, it's wild that that's also becoming more commonplace to accept. So I just think that your journey in working in like politics and socialism and stuff is so interesting, because I mean, how often do you get to talk to somebody that like has a fucking role and like, you know, gets to dedicate their whole lives to it? So you started doing these talkbacks and everything, and what was your first, if you are okay with talking about it, like what was your like literal first like title like in an organization? What was your first role?
So the way we organize is, you know, you join a group, you join a branch like in your city, and you're involved in your branch. The name of the organization is Socialist Alternative. I don't think I said it earlier, but so you're in a local branch, right? And you attend once a week the meetings, and we go like try to meet people and recruit people and talk to people and have public events and stuff like that. And then even without being like a staffer, once you've taken, you know, you can develop into a role where you're sort of like helping run your branch. And that's not done by people who are paid. That's just ordinary working people who are developing and want to play a bigger role. And so you can help do things like, you know, run the meetings that happen in your community every week and stuff like that. And so I think that was my first role, was being what we call a branch organizer, where you're sort of like pulling together the meeting every week and here's the agenda that we're, sort of your elected leadership is proposing for this week's meeting, where we're going to talk about this and that, and stuff like that, where you're sort of elected into a political leadership of your local branch. And so I think that was the first role that I had. It wasn't paid. And then eventually we did an election campaign in Minneapolis where we were trying to get a socialist elected, and I was paid by that as like a campaign staffer. And then eventually I'm like the treasurer of the organization now. So it sort of eventually played that role where I like manage and assist and sort of politically direct the finances for the organization nationally.
Which nationally, but it is also an international organization, correct? Okay, cool.
Yeah, we're affiliated with an international.
And so you got to like you get to travel for work and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's really great.
And did you move to New York and then you were the treasurer, or were you treasurer while you're still in Minnesota?
Well, I was still here. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep.
So if I remember correctly, the first campaign that you work on, they didn't win, but you all made really good strides, and like it was great.
Yes.
Great pointing towards the future. And then later, is it okay if I use names and stuff?
Yeah.
Ginger.
Yeah.
Yeah. Worked on the Ginger campaign. I don't know.
Ginger Jensen.
Yeah. Ginger Jensen. So that was that the next campaign that Socialist Alternative worked on, or was it Kasham?
It was Shama.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Shama ran simultaneous. We were running multiple campaigns at the same time.
That's
for
right.
city council in different cities.
Okay.
So
Can you talk about the
Shama
Shama campaign?
Yes, I would love to. So Shama is now an elected city council member in Seattle. And it was really exciting. So she ran a couple times and raised her profile and stuff like that, and then won the city council election seat in 2013, which really broke open a lot of things for, I think, the socialist left in a big way, where we had this example, like she's a Marxist on city council, and what does that mean?
Yeah.
That doesn't.
Was she? Sorry to interrupt.
No,
she was
okay.
like the first.
Yeah,
she has a title, some weird title.
It's like the first in Seattle City Council in 100 years or something like that.
Yeah.
But the main thing is that it was pretty
right.
People don't remember, they're not Marxists in City Council
Right.
in sort of the modern time, and I think she did a great job showing what that means, which is not like, oh hi, I got elected, thanks for electing me, I'm your friendly socialist, and then like
my name tag says Marxist.
Yeah. She really used that office, and we use that office to build movements and to build collective struggle to win things. One socialist in office is not gonna change the world on their own, but if they leverage and build like community power and struggle and movements, you can change a lot of things. And we did that through, Shama was able to play a leading role in the fight for the $15 minimum wage, which workers had sort of initiated already around that time. And we were able to really take that up and win the minimum wage increase in Seattle, which was the first major city to do so. And that really helped it, it spread to Minneapolis and stuff like that. And there was a series of things that we were able to really win in Seattle and do it in the way that we're showing what it means to be a socialist in office and raise a profile of socialist ideas. So then obviously that means that her reelection campaigns are really hard because the businesses that, for example, now are paying a $15 minimum wage and things like that, they don't want her to continue in office. And so we had to fight for her reelection in 2015. And in a real way, I mean, people were becoming excited about their city council member for the first time. I mean, I don't
Totally.
City council's not exciting, right?
Totally.
And so that helped. And also Shama being at the forefront of the $15 minimum wage really helped. So in 2015, we were able to win very well that election. But since then, we've taken on, like, Shama has won historic renter rights protections in Seattle, which Seattle is really, I mean, it is, I don't know how people afford to live there. I have off and on at various times, and it is just horrifying. Working people and ordinary people are being pushed out of that city in a really unbelievable way. And so that was crucial for Seattle. And she's being able to lead on a whole series of hard-fought victories that put a target on her. And so this last election campaign that just ended like a month and a half ago, it was really brutal. It turned into an all-out battle with the richest corporations in the country, in the world, because Shama had led a battle to tax Amazon. Amazon is based in Seattle. And so in her last sort of session, or in her last time in office before this reelection campaign, she led that fight. And Amazon ended up pulling in like sort of the mayor and all the rest of the city council and bullying them out of it after they'd already voted unanimously for it.
Wow.
So then they repealed the Amazon tax, which was a show of power. And so that also just made it very clear. And those politicians didn't look great for doing that either. And so this campaign was just fully all out. Amazon spent so much money. Corporations in total spent $4 million on the Seattle City Council elections. And then Amazon, they spent $1.5 million, which did, I think, backfire for them because like they even did something like putting out a press release when they dropped another $1 million in to explain that they just really care about Seattle, you know, stuff like that. And so that was horrifying. It was a really intense race. And that's on top of the fact that for the last 6 years, Sharma's been in office for 6 years and the media attacks her nonstop. If she wins something, it was other people who did it. If they think they can attack her on something, they show the picture, you know, of the angry Indian lady and they say she's terrible, like constantly. It's just constant. And so the fact that we were able to mobilize such significant sections of the community, of the labor movement, and win that election, it was huge. And people, I think it's really a mandate that people in Seattle, and I think that reflects what people want around the country right now.
Hell yeah.
They want to tax Amazon.
Absolutely.
They want to tax the major corporations that exist, that do whatever they want, that get tax breaks like we saw in New York. Amazon tried to move there and get endless tax breaks from New York, right?
So
and people
hilarious.
organized against it.
Yep.
And people, that's a wider spread sort of idea that people have right now, that why are we killing ourselves constantly to make ends meet, to pay our rent, and then the corporations, they don't pay anything in taxes. How is that? You know, people are really angry about that. And so I think her winning that election in the face of everything against us there shows that people are they really want to fight this and they want corporations to pay.
Totally. Yeah. I feel like we're also kind of realizing after we do stand up and when we do actually win and everything, how kind of empty a lot of these threats are too. I'm trying to remember specifically with New York, but there was some sort of thing like Amazon's like, well, we're not gonna. Yep. And then they did.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They backed out because they wanted endless breaks and whatever, all of this stuff. And then when they weren't getting it, they backed out, but now they're doing it anyway.
Yeah. So wild. So we jumped around a little bit, but in between, you know, obviously Shama's first campaign and this last one, then you also have worked on other campaigns. And another one was the 15 an hour here in Minneapolis. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I wasn't around as much for that, actually. I think I was in New York.
Your organization, sorry.
Can you
just even share that?
Absolutely. So the $15 minimum wage in Seattle obviously inspired a lot of people that it was possible to raise the minimum wage. And so in Minneapolis, and partially because that election campaign that we ran in 2013 was able to raise the profile of these demands and raise the demand of a $15 minimum wage, we were able to launch 15 Now, an organization in Minneapolis that fought to help win the minimum wage increase, both in Minneapolis but also in St. Paul as well. And that was done in a really similar way. We were mobilizing communities, we're mobilizing labor, bringing people together to figure out how to put pressure, you know, what we're doing. And this should be the goal, I think, of a lot of movements right now, and is how we function, is like you build community power to win things and to show the establishment and to show people in power that like you can't just ignore us and you have to make concessions and you have to give us what we want in a way. And that's what was done in Minneapolis for $15 minimum wage, which is really exciting.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. So all that happened.
Sure did.
You bopped around.
Yes.
You kind of just move all over the place, right? Depending on where you need to be.
Yeah.
Now you're back in Minnesota. Welcome, man.
Yeah, it's great. It's really nice.
Even with the ice seasons here now.
Yeah, that's not as great. I don't love that. I just moved back here from Seattle and I thought, like, I'm so excited to be in Minnesota so bad that I don't even care that winter's happening. I'm just going to be in my house, but I do care. It's not great.
Yeah, not as fun.
No.
And then you helped write a book. What?
Yes.
Tell me about it. I
Yes.
haven't gotten to read it yet because you just gave me a copy.
Okay, so yeah, this book is a very shortened sort of like first volume, first edition of just giving a sense of like how it's called Socialist Feminism and the New Women's Movement. So right now in the world, women are fighting back in a way that hasn't happened in a long time, and it's really exciting. But that shows consciousness has changed, and I think it's just clear consciousness has been changing around sexism, from acknowledging more and more that sexism is bad and that we shouldn't do it, to wanting to fight sexism and fight the oppression of women and fight for women's rights. And so this book kind of does a few things. There's 3 parts. One is looking back at like, okay, how did sexism even develop? Like, why is it like this now? And looking at sort of a socialist perspective of how sexism and how the family as a structure developed, which shows us that like it is really integrated to the capitalist system. It's integrated with the development of class society and us all being put in different classes, which to me shows that like we can fight it. And then we talk a bit in the second part about like the development of women's rights in the U.S. and the civil rights movement and various labor struggles that took place. And then looking more at now. And the reason we started this project was because of the massive fight back against Donald Trump and the women's marches and how that seemed like a really pivotal moment for looking at the system as we have it now and for fighting back. And so we look at that struggle a bit and look at how we got Trump, as well as sort of the more recent, what was the alternative to Trump, right? Like what were people given the choice? People were given Trump, which was a middle finger to the world, or they were given Hillary Clinton, who is a woman. So isn't that exciting? And shouldn't we be voting for women?
Oh, I love it. Keep going.
But in reality, Hillary Clinton, she didn't speak to people who are facing poverty, who are facing, the real conditions of working people in the U.S. And she did not inspire people, and people didn't want to vote for her. And that is really, I think, just it shows the failure of the Democratic Party, and that the Democratic Party they are a big business party, and that does not excite people right now. With development of consciousness of people seeing after things like Occupy Wall Street, who really benefits from the oppression and from the fact that we are grinding and working constantly to get by. And who benefits from that? It's the corporations that fund both the Republicans and the Democrats. And so Hillary Clinton did not inspire people. And Trump he was the fuck you. And that sort of, that we see that I think the Democratic Party has a role to play in that. And they continue to sort of put forward talking points against sexism and against racism and against homophobia and all these things, and give lip service when they need to, when they're forced to support marriage equality, when they're forced to speak out against attacks on abortion rights and stuff like that. But they aren't doing anything. And in fact, when they're in power, they reside over endless budget cuts to social services that we rely on, and attacks on working people as well. But then when they have the chance, they blame the Republican Party. And so it is just, I think it shows that we need a new party. We need something that, is built by working people and represent and fights for working people. And I think that is tied up in all of these struggles that we're talking about. And so that whole full case isn't given in the book, but it shows where we're at. And I think, and we also have a section on sort of the debates that exist in feminism today, which I think is exciting. And so, it was a collaborative effort, and it's a product of the politics of socialist alternative that I was really lucky to be a part of writing it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I have kind of a big question for you. Do you think that a new party is like the resolution, or do you think it's the next step towards a resolution for fixing all these problems?
I think it's a really crucial step that we, and I think there's glimmers of what would be possible, right? Like Bernie Sanders is very inspiring.
Yeah.
And he is pulling together people and inspiring people who have been long disenfranchised from politics. And imagine if Bernie Sanders, who is being fought in the Democratic primary, if he gets pushed out, if he gets I mean, in 2016, it wasn't just that he lost, he was pushed out of the primary. And even imagine then, or imagine now, if in the face of that, Bernie Sanders said, I am launching a new party, and a party that has democratic structures, a party where if a leader is betraying people, you can recall them in a genuine way, a party for working people. That would change the whole country. That would have an impact in the entire world of inspiring people. And I think that is a crucial step in raising people's consciousness. And no doubt it would be a complicated process. There'd be debates. There'd be, as a socialist, I might not agree with a lot of the things that a workers' party might do, depending on, there's going to be fights for leadership. But I think it would be it would just change everything and be a huge step, and it would raise people's confidence, which is what's necessary to fight back.
Totally.
A big part of that is confidence.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people that are caught in the middle, which is a little bit of a point of the whole conversation of the last election of just like, well, either that or fuck it, right? Like, I don't play part of the game and all that stuff and everything. And it's like, I mean, you can do whatever you want, but it's undeniable to say, I mean, everything that you just said, that wouldn't give hope to people, that wouldn't show that we have more power than we think and all that stuff. Yeah, how compromise is necessary.
Right.
Okay, and then I have another two questions. Yes. They were both kind of just back on like your experience in organizing and everything. It seems like from what you've been saying, just like consciousness and people's awareness being raised is probably one of the biggest changes that you've seen in like the organization and everything. Has anything else from where you're standing today, from where you started out in the organization, like what has changed about it? Has anything changed about it? Like
about my organization?
Your organization, yeah, just socialist,
yes, totally.
The world of that.
Yes. When I first joined, we were quite smaller. And in a way, I think Bernie Sanders and other changes in Occupy Wall Street has changed people's approach to socialism. People want socialist ideas way more, and are way more critical of capitalism and craving socialism or looking to it for answers. And so that has changed. I think the whole socialist left is very different now than it was, 12 years ago when I got involved. And our organization is definitely, we're bigger. We're like 5 times bigger than we were, with people being excited and wanting to join. There's the Democratic Socialists of America that exists now in a real way and didn't really exist then. And there's just a bigger socialist left, which is super exciting. I think, that also comes with debates, which I think is how you grow and how you develop and how you sharpen your ideas. And my organization we are an organization that uses what we call democratic centralism, as a democratic organization, but we make decisions together, and we carry them out in a sort of like all forces at the point of attack kind of way. And I think that does stand in contrast with we have a lot of different ideas on the socialist left and on the left, and different sort of competing, how do we organize? And I think Occupy Wall Street really showed that too, of like a live debate of how do you exist and how do you get things done. And so I think that my confidence in the way that our organization operates has only been increased, in that we have a very serious collective process. We elect leaderships and we have debates, and those leaderships, if they betray you, they get thrown out, or you address that, and you change it, and you go through debates where it matters if we disagree, and we can decide when it's okay to disagree, and we carry on, and we decide when we need to put attention to talking things out. And I think that only makes us stronger. And I think that if you don't do that, you do build in sort of like dysfunction that can exist later and can pop up. And in a way, the role of, I didn't understand when I first got involved how important the role of leadership is, and how throughout history, and that's something that we talk about in the book a lot, that you see these moments that have happened in society where there is an explosion and there's a breaking point, and really those in power are falling or being thrown out, or there's just a change moment in history. And there's many factors in that and how that develops and what impacts the next step. But whether or not that there is a leadership of a movement that has the interest of working people and is ready to fight, I think that is again and again something that without that, we see movements fail or not, or fail to build their full potential at the very least. And so I think that has been a real education for me of seeing that in action in various movements where you see, here's the potential. People are here. They want to fight. But if you don't have the capacity to sort of collectively put forward what you want, and if you have a massive movement, that means you need to like collectively elect people to put forward, you know, things like that. What do you do? And that's been, I think that's a change where there are debates about that more on the left. And the growth of people being interested in socialist ideas also brings those things forward. But that's something that's very different than when I first got involved in socialist politics.
Totally.
You know?
So everything that you just said, I feel like can also answer the question that I'm about to ask. But like, you know, you're saying that some of the most important things, some of the changes, but also some of the most important things to move forward have been proven to be, you know, good leadership, attentive leadership, being able to have discussions no matter what level of leadership or otherwise you're at. Have there been any things that I guess have just been like obvious failures, or like just like, oh shit, like anything that you or everybody has like really learned from, or something that comes up from time to time? There doesn't have to be anything. I'm just curious.
I think it does happen. I'm trying to think of something that comes up repeatedly.
I can just imagine that something sneaks in unless you, I mean, you know, just like you said, I guess I would imagine, you know, it's like good leadership. It's like if you don't constantly have that in the microscope, like that can, you know.
The only way to constantly have that though is to constantly have like an engaged membership, right?
Totally.
So like, and that's a challenge to constantly build that too. Like you need to make sure that we can both pull together and do our work, do the thing that we decide to do. But also have a very democratic and engaged organization from all levels. And that's the only way to assure that leadership is constantly on it and constantly accountable. And so that is a challenge. And I think that is something that you always have to check on. And you always, if you have that commitment as a socialist organization, you need to constantly be carrying that out. And I think that's important. And that's always an ongoing challenge where mistakes can happen, and mistakes happen across the left on that, I think. Yeah.
Totally. So if you could tell Kelly 12 years ago something about just some advice about what you're about to start out on, is there anything that comes to mind?
Yeah.
Encouraging or otherwise?
I think I would tell Kelly 12 years ago not to always talk in a super high voice because you're nervous. That's a thing I used to do
Very
constantly.
important.
And generally, I think living in this world, I've always suffered with like a lack of confidence, at all times. And I know we've talked about this, and I know that it's fermented in, in the system completely. I think, I've had plenty of crisis of confidence in terms of, and I think anybody who's fully engaged with what, like a sort of a passionate thing, whether it's political or religious or a project in any way, like you have crisis of confidence. Like, is this what I'm doing? Is this correct? Are there other ways? And I think every time I've had that, I've grown a lot in that process. That's always been really useful to have those crises.
Totally.
But,
not be scared of the friction
and
stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And be confident. Yeah,
exactly.
I can imagine being in an organization full of passionate, relatively educated, everybody's got their point of view, even though it's supposed to be kind of similar.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, maybe last question here, unless you have anything else you want to talk about. I actually have two more questions.
Okay.
So we got to hear about your journey, and what's like some good advice for if somebody wants to break into socialism? Like, what would be a cool thing?
For me, I mean, you can read a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
Like, reading is great, but for me, it was getting involved in an organization that changed it. Just the living education that you get and the discussions. Like, I remember so vividly, and I was super fresh to the world, but just so vividly, like getting in a room with Like I walk in and there's 12 people there and they talk about, I think the first discussion I was ever a part of was just a meeting where we talked about the healthcare system. And I didn't know anything about the healthcare system.
Totally.
And it just changes the whole way you think about things. To show, just how viscerally it exists for profit and how it doesn't have to be like this, and how it could be organized differently and how we would say it could be organized under a socialist society. That just like blew my mind at the time. And I think even if you already, I think a lot of people right now have a higher level of consciousness than I did at that time because of what's going on in society. But I think getting involved and getting active in an organization, you're really finding a political home and a family, and you're invested in this struggle. And that, I think, is the best way to, I think people should join Socialist Alternative, of course, if you'd like. And we are there for that. But getting active, I think, getting active in movements and actively being a socialist can change your life in the best possible way.
Books are awesome, but like reality testing ideas and
you gotta have both.
Hearing examples and everything. Yeah,
exactly.
Really powerful. Cool. Last question.
Yes.
What's on the horizon? What you up to? What you excited about?
Yeah. I am. Well, first I'm excited for winter. Stay in my house a bit and recharge my life a bit. And then I'm also really excited about Bernie Sanders.
Cool.
I think this year is a big...
I never thought I would hear you say that, if I'm being completely honest.
It's exciting.
That's awesome.
I think that campaign shows, it points to what's possible.
Totally.
And I'm excited to get involved and to go do campaigning work and to meet people who are excited about Bernie Sanders.
Hell yeah.
I think there's a lot of overlap between people who are excited about Bernie Sanders because they're just like pissed off and like there are people where we come from who are excited about Bernie Sanders and stuff like that in a very basic, like they hate politicians, but Bernie Sanders because he hates politicians too, stuff like that. But there's also a lot of people who are, this is a part of, and includes people who in 2016 this process started, but this is a part of them being like, a socialist, that's what we need now. And are being excited about socialist ideas. And I think that's great. And being involved in that and talking to those people, I think is really important. And I mean, imagine if Bernie Sanders won the primary and it was Bernie Sanders versus Donald Trump. I mean, I think it just, exactly.
So
and I think it's hard for people to even imagine that's how exciting it is to show that, I think if not, there will be a lot of, the Democratic Party will point very clearly to get Trump out, even though they didn't even do that much to fight him and his policies. But if people are presented with somebody completely underwhelming, I mean, Joe Biden just said he'd have a Republican running mate and stuff like that. Like, it is just giving a really
terrifying,
sorry choices to people. And then how can you blame them when Trump gets elected? Like, it is just, it's a bad situation. But Bernie Sanders does encapsulate so much enthusiasm and points very clearly to who's to blame for this system. And I think his calls for things like Medicare for All and erasing student loan debt and all of these things, it does point in a direction that people are excited by. And I think, so that's exciting.
That's awesome.
I'm excited about that on the horizon.
Do you have any predictions for his running mate?
I wish it could be AOC. That would be cool. But I Googled it and she's too young, I think.
Really?
Yeah.
What about Elon? Or is that even
Ilhan?
a thing? Oh, yeah.
I have no idea.
They've just been AOC and
the
Ilhan
squad
have
been
hanging
really
out a lot.
Yes. Yeah. Their endorsement
fun.
changed everything.
Yeah.
And I think it was super pivotal when that happened. I Googled it and AOC I think is too young for.
Fuck.
Yeah. I thought that was maybe going to happen.
Yeah,
and then,
totally. Yeah. Okay. Well, sweet.
We'll see.
Yeah.
You don't just determine a running mate unless you make it through the primary, right?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So he's got to make it through first. Yeah.
God. I'm just praying right now. I don't really do that, but yeah. Cool. That was fucking awesome. You're a well of information. You know that, right?
You're so wonderful to talk to. There's no other human being I would do this with.
Yay! I know. I feel like I've made you do this a couple times. And like, The other times I didn't even get to use the footage at all, but
Oh, right,
this one,
yeah.
I was thinking about that. I gotta dig that up.
Right, that
You had
one.
a lot
in
of
your
cool
room.
shit to say then too.
I don't remember it. I black these things out. Makes you nervous. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks
Yeah,
again.
thanks for having me.
Have a great New Year's.
Thanks, you too.